also traditional Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. To understand atheist and agnostic.
Whoa, Preston.
Hi, Katie.
Get off your phone.
Okay.
It'll rot your brain on today's episode of
The Holy Watermelon Podcast.
I don't know how to make a segue into this one.
This is a bit of a bummer.
I feel like it's a more awkward conversation than even our sex talk.
I don't feel like it's more awkward.
People don't like talking about death. We're going to talk about some gross things today.
A little bit. But, death is around us all the time. Can't really avoid it. That's the deal.
No. It's inevitable.
That's
like
what
Thanos.
they say. Yeah. So I was talking to a person that I work with the other day about his concern with ghosts.
Okay.
He was actually really worried about the Titanic 2 expedition and all that nonsense. But the conversation led very quickly to ghosts. And it boggles my mind that we haven't just agreed that everywhere on the planet is super haunted or nowhere is.
I have had that thought as well. I don't disagree with him because my house alone has been around since the 50s. You can't tell me something hasn't died nearby.
Right?
Actually, I have heard that there is an unfortunate story with the next door house. So,
Tell me more.
apparently someone killed themselves next door before the current people
Bummer.
lived there.
Are there haunting stories?
Not that I've heard of.
Okay.
And
Just the unfortunate circumstances of death.
Yes, but that's typically
What leads
where
to
a
haunting?
haunting story.
Yeah.
And I always think about how come you don't get haunted by your cat or your dog? How
Right.
come ghosts are only humans? How come there's no bear ghosts?
It's a great question.
How can we call
Cocaine Bear has unfinished business.
we should name this episode, How Come There Are No Bear Ghosts? Though I do really like your title, which we will probably stay with. But I have often thought.
Yeah, for sure.
Or like, I don't know.
Dinosaur ghosts. Why are we
Dinosaur
not
ghosts?
haunted by the
Giant.
soul of absolutely ravaged Triceratops?
And also there's like, I don't know, ghosts feel like they're from a very specific time period. Like
Yeah.
if you hear how come we don't have a ghost kicking around from the 1200s?
Right. All ghosts are Dickensian.
Yeah, or more modern.
Sure.
But anyway.
Death is great, and we have really weird ways of dealing with it.
We really do, and I will sort of preface this before we break it down by religion is like we kind of think our way is the right way or the normal way. And reading some of these, someone was like, that actually makes a lot of sense on how they handle death. And then some of them, I'm like, that's fucking weird.
Sure.
I won't.
Well, if you see one thing often enough, even if you aren't behind it theologically, the habits are still your habits. Normal gets normal.
Yeah. So that was, eye-opening,
Sure.
to say the least.
Yeah.
Anyway, shall we kick it off with our good old Abrahamic buddies?
Let's do it.
All right.
Stick with what's most familiar, and then we'll dig
Dig.
into, the good stuff. So in Judaism, respect for the dead is one of the most important mitzvot. I feel like we've used this word before. It's commandments. So really take care of the dead. Traditionally, Jewish people bury their dead intact. Some people, mostly, your more reformed, more liberal Jewish groups, will do the cremation thing. I think that's generally the theme we'll see moving forward is the more conservatives will not like cremation.
Right.
We're going to run out of space real soon. An interesting thing that I have read about Judaism is that cremation is counted as destruction of property. That's
Whose property?
an interesting question.
God's property.
That makes sense. But there's also the strong family thing in Judaism where
Right.
there's like you belong to your family in this way that you are, if you're not moving that body around yourself anymore, your property.
Oh. We'll move you around. Oh, wait, that's a different tradition we're going to talk about.
Yeah. Jewish people tend to observe a strict week of mourning after a funeral. They call it the Shiva. It's just the number 7, so 7 days of mourning. And during this process, mirrors in the home are often covered, and it's good to keep candles burning. And mourners will sit on nice low stools, like low as your squatty potty.
I'm too old for that. Not even that old.
It's a little tough, but these are all indications of mourning. Black veil is good for that. Things like that.
Yeah, Abrahamic and Western favor black for mourning.
Yeah. And traditionally, you don't want to hasten up a death. You don't want to speed things along, even if you know death is imminent. Our country has a pretty interesting relationship with assisted death.
I think it's going to have to change. Anyway, that's not to digress too much. We could go on and chat about that, but I have my opinion.
Yeah. Having it available makes perfect sense. The reality of the government actually pressuring people into it, I'm not a big fan of. But
yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be a government decision, but just like your pets, to let someone live in pain just so they can live as long as possible.
Right.
And healthcare costs are only going to get more expensive.
Right. If you're
for whomever.
If the only activity on your schedule day to day for months on end is eating up resources, at some point you got to figure out maybe there's a better plan.
Well, and I care less about resources as opposed to quality of life.
Right.
Like we have family members that live every day in pain.
Right.
It's like, and then they're also paying for fentanyl patches, which are very expensive, to manage that pain that they're still in.
Fentanyl is a wild thing.
Right? Anyway, wild.
Yeah. But as you may have deduced, we're going to talk about some ghosts today.
Preston really wants to talk about ghosts today.
Yeah. So the Tanakh does mention ghosts. There's a lot of different kinds of ghosts. I've been, in unrelated studies, been trying to suss out how different people categorize ghosts.
Like angels.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
So you've got poltergeists who can legit
right.
interact with the physical world. And then you've got shades, which are not so much.
They're there, but they can't do anything.
Right. Like maybe you can communicate them, maybe not. But they may be barely visible. They might be more visible. But they're not going to interact physically with the world. So they're like a shadow. So that's a shade sort of thing. So what we have in the Tanakh usually talks about shades more than poltergeists.
Okay.
That we have in ancient Israel the belief that ghosts, the spirits of the departed, could be summoned, and you could have conversations with them and learn things from them. The story of Saul and the witch of Endor is an example.
That's from Star Wars, right?
George Lucas is not half as original as he likes to get credit for. And Endor was just an old place.
Oh.
Yeah. No Ewoks.
What?
Which is just Wookiee backwards. Almost. Not perfectly.
I see your theory, yeah.
No, the plan was that they were going to go to the Wookiee homeworld in Return of the Jedi. And then they couldn't figure out how to do it in a reasonable way. So they decided, okay, we'll make smaller costumes and just cast little people.
Okay, wow. Also some Star Wars backstory from Preston today.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I interrupted, and I regret interrupting now.
So the shades are a thing that is a matter of concern in Jewish folklore and in their theology a little bit as well. There are explicit commandments. Do not mess with people who summon ghosts.
Fair.
Which makes sense. And they also talk about shades that can linger in the land and just stay near the place where they lived or where they died. Isaiah talks a little bit about those too. So I think it's kind of interesting. Ghosts, very solid part of the religious tradition. And there are, in more recent than biblical texts, traditions of these shades actually possessing a body.
Cool.
Usually for a short time just to accomplish a specific task. We talked about this a little bit in our voodoo episode, actually. It's the same sort of idea.
Which makes a bit of sense knowing the origins of voodoo.
Right.
And
well, especially the way it interacted with other religions on its way here. Yeah. So, kind of interesting that this possession business is really interesting. And as we get into Christianity, there's stories of ghosts in the New Testament in Jewish populations where the story feels a lot different, knowing that there's this belief locally that these would be things that dead people are coming back to accomplish rather than demons, like the Greek interpretation jumps onto it. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Kind of fun.
Yeah. You know who loves death? Christians.
I don't even remember where the quote came from originally, but I feel like I've quoted it a few times. Christians are just way too excited to die.
Yeah. Oh, man, they love it. Why is that, Preston?
That we talk so much about the promise that the next life is going to be better. And yeah, there's so much wrong with this world that it makes sense to hope for something better. But when it gets anywhere close to somebody else realizing that you're too excited to die, you have really screwed up where your focuses are.
Yeah. And even like trying to make it all happen faster, try to bring out the second coming. It's like,
well, there's a lot of different ideas of what is supposed to trigger the second coming.
Humans aren't going to do it.
No, it's outside our control. We can't control God.
Doesn't mean people aren't
come when he's
trying
planning to come.
because they can't wait.
Yeah.
Anyway, as I mentioned, Christians historically also don't like cremation because there'd be no corpse when Jesus comes back and raises everyone from the dead. Christians believe in a physical resurrection.
Yeah, your body's got to rise from the grave, and as you pivot at the waist, you got to be facing east.
That sounds horrifying. It's all these, and they all have to claw up 6 feet. Wow.
Yeah. Imagine the horror that this event would be.
Yeah. Anyway, but again, a lot of them are more relaxed now. I mean, I think of just doing people in my world. Both of my grandparents were cremated, and they were Christians. So, anyway, I feel like they're the most relaxed now of any of the groups.
Probably.
And I mean, Christian is a really big umbrella.
It sure is.
But I'm sure there's groups within Christianity that still have a good burial, probably Catholic.
Yeah. So I went to my granddad's funeral last
We both
summer.
did a bunch of funerals recently.
Yeah. What a time.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was interesting that I had never talked about religion at all with my granddad. I'd never thought that he identified as Christian. Found out at his funeral this was an important detail to somebody.
There you go.
Yeah. So there was a little ash cross dropped on his coffin and was laid down on the ground, making sure that he was facing in a way that if he were to bend at the waist, he'd be facing east.
In 6 feet of dirt.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. It was an interesting learning experience.
Well, good.
And now we're talking about death.
Now we're talking about death. In the terms of Christian, wakes are a Christian thing.
Yeah. I haven't heard the word wake used a lot outside of a Catholic context. Though I certainly can't say that that's not happening. But it's certainly an old tradition.
Yeah, and as someone who's involved with the Irish community, the Irish still love a good wake. I don't know too many other groups that do it. And I don't know if that's because it's Irish or because it's Catholic, like what that Venn diagram looks like. And how much it's just the circles I run in. But the Irish love a good wake. The name comes from staying up long hours watching over the dead while reciting psalms.
So we're not talking about the risk of the dead waking up. It's just that you got to stay awake to watch the body.
To watch.
In case it wakes up.
In case it wakes up, to make sure.
I mean, it does make sense because historically we have had situations aplenty, enough that we've taken precautions.
Bells and
where
wakes.
the bodies do occasionally get back up again after we thought they were dead, but we're just dumb.
If you want to hear a great vaudeville song about exactly that, it's called Tim Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah.
And basically he's dead and everyone's sad, and then someone spills whiskey on him and he comes back to life because whiskey.
It's like the plants in my office.
Water! Oh, that's terrible, Preston.
No one's perfect.
Fair. You don't need to keep plants if you're just going to kill them.
I'm going to be honest, I don't keep plants in my office.
Someone else.
And the person who generally takes care of them generally takes very good care of them. But there are occasionally exceptions.
We're not going to do a full episode on heaven or hell, but Christians and even Muslims and Jews, depending on whether you're good or bad, you get sent to heaven or hell. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah.
That definitely deserves its own episode. So,
yeah, for most of history, the majority of Christians and an awful lot of segments of the Jewish population as well have believed in a tiered series of heavens. In our angels episode, we talked about the ninth heaven, where like the greatest of the angels live
God,
forever with God, and the seventh heaven is a thing that happens occasionally in the way. What's the word I'm looking for? It's a common enough English idiom. There's a TV show.
I know.
Who was in that TV show? I watched it for a year.
The most
like
famous
2002.
person out of Seventh Heaven was Jessica Biel. She was the second oldest daughter.
Okay.
The guy who played the Christian pastor ended up being a pedophile in real life.
Oh no.
Yeah, she was the most famous. I can't think of any of the other actors' names now. The older
there was another singer who was like really popular for a really short time that was from that show, wasn't there? I don't know. I've got nothing.
Maybe as a side character, but of the family, only Jessica Biel made it anywhere significant.
Okay.
Marrying JT and all. And
Right.
actually having some decent movie roles afterwards.
Right. Good for her.
Yeah, I mean, considering no one else.
Yeah. The phrase "I'm on cloud nine."
Yep.
I don't think you hear that a whole lot anymore either. But that was a thing that
Cloud9 Superstore.
your grandpappy probably said. Man, Superstar was a good show.
Superstore was a good show. Better than Seventh Heaven.
Yes. Yeah. So for a long time, we talked about these tiered heavens that, salvation is universal, but because people suck to different degrees, some of us are going to achieve a better situation.
Heaven or hell, yeah.
Protestants, especially like the evangelical movement, mostly believe in the simple dichotomy of black and white. No shades of gray. Everything that's wrong with you is going to be fixed or burn forever in hell. It's hard to say that I see the appeal to that. I don't really like it.
I mean,
it takes away your identity.
Well, and if it's not black and white, then everyone's going to hell because nobody's.
And that's absolutely contrary to the mission of Jesus. Oh, well.
I guess we'll find out one day.
Yeah. I think it's a lot more reasonable to accept this more classical idea of shades of gray. It just makes sense. Different types of people organized and divided based on the way they choose to live their lives would merit different levels of heaven, I think is really a really clean way of explaining it. There was a lady I used to visit for a while when I lived in New Jersey who hated the idea that God would separate people based on any judgment at all. It makes a lot more sense that we would separate ourselves, right? If you like stealing but hate violence, there's a community for you where you're safe from the violent, but the people who don't like being robbed are safe from you.
That's a good. So you just all rob each other for all time.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good punishment.
Right?
You steal something, then you turn around and your shit's gone.
Yeah.
So then you got to steal more.
It feels a lot like the punishment fitting the crime.
Yeah, it does. We didn't put in our notes, but I know, I went to a Catholic funeral recently where Don't know if you want to touch on that.
Sure, yeah. What is it that you experienced that you want to share?
I mean, I've been to 2 or 3 Catholic funerals now. Obviously, this one most recently. Catholic funerals are long because they do a full mass. I will say the thing about Catholic funerals, there's a lot of talk about God and not nearly as much about the person.
Sure. Now, is this a mass in addition to the daily mass? Or is it not just a funeral attached to the daily mass?
No, they do my understanding is they do a separate funeral mass.
I mean, nobody's accusing the Catholics of being efficient.
No, because it also took a long time. And then, of course, I was like looking for the reliquary because now we know from our lovely guest Frank McMahon confirmed that there is a holy relic in every Catholic church.
Right.
So I'm looking for bits of saints.
Well, at the bare minimum, they'll have one locked away in the tabernacle, right? And you wouldn't get to see that. But yeah, if there's more about on display,
there was
that'd be cool to catch.
Like pretty fancy in a corner, and I was like, I don't know what that is.
Okay.
And I didn't get close enough because I left the front for the family. But
no, you got to push your way through during a funeral.
During it. I need a front row seat, please, because I just need a front row seat. But that's the biggest thing. Like, I mean, the last funeral I went to was as secular as a funeral gets.
Sure.
And they talk a lot about the person that passed. So it's just different, but, you know, everyone's, priest especially, very hopeful that she's in a better place. And we're the ones who are the losers. And
right.
I don't know. I mean, you know, I don't believe any of that. I was like, is she? I mean, it's nice to think, but why are there no bear ghosts?
Because they don't have unfinished business. They got their honey. They're happy.
But if there's no bear heaven and bear hell, why is there a human heaven and human hell? Why are there no bear ghosts? That's my thesis.
I have a hypothesis.
Okay.
That bear heaven is fish hell. It's a very efficient system, and it's good enough that they don't need to linger here on Earth.
I've heard that squirrel hell is dog heaven.
Yeah. Perfect. So Christianity does inherit a lot from Jewish thought. It makes sense. Dispensationalism's got some tricky bits to it, but the inheritance system is inarguable. And that includes the matter of ghosts and the idea of possessing spirits. I already mentioned shows up in the New Testament, but Greco-Roman thought shows a lot of its influence in the way that we see demons described in the Christian tradition. That almost every ghost that you see described in the New Testament, apart from when they think that maybe Jesus is a ghost, until he says, "Touch me and find out."
Pull my finger. Preston just wiggled his finger at me, so pull my finger. Jesus, Matthew 22:34.
Yeah, all the ghosts are, well, terrible demons possessing people or making everybody have a bad time. Jehovah's Witnesses and Christadelphians outright deny the possibility of ghosts, which is really frustrating for them when you point out the holes in that logic. But, oh well, I mean, they just stop visiting.
As much as I, try to be fair to, they're the least Christian of the Christians.
I mean, it's so hard to delineate what is Christian and what isn't.
Exactly, I know, but was my point. I was trying to poorly word, but
yeah.
But they're at least Christian.
I can't argue with that in this moment.
My next thesis.
Seventh-day Adventists got a lot of those in my family.
Oh, interesting.
They teach that any ghost you might encounter is absolutely certainly a demon in disguise.
Cool.
Sure. Not that I'm encountering a whole lot of ghosts.
No, but I just like am imagining a ghost pulling off its ghost mask. Like in Scooby-Doo. And being like, there's a demon under here.
I like that imagery.
Thank you.
But generally everybody agrees they can basically shapeshift.
Oh.
Which...
Oh.
Yeah.
That makes a lot more sense, but it's way less cool.
Right? Most other Christians admit the possibility of the disguise problem, but acknowledge that a ghost could genuinely be the dead person you're after. The ghost that we see in the Witch of Endor story, it's not really answered in a really concrete way whether or not this should be expected to be a demon in disguise or the dead prophet returned. Because that wasn't the important part of the story. The important part of the story was stop getting witches to summon demons.
Oh.
Many Christians believe that the dead can take on the role of angel.
Which is where, as we were writing these notes, I was like, we need to separate heaven and hell. And even we talked about angels, and I was like, but dead people become angels.
Right.
So yeah, there's like a whole other piece to this.
Yeah. The Revelation talks about how there's like a third of the host of heaven fell with Lucifer, as most people prefer to call him.
Satan is accurate.
Satan
Lucifer
is a far more
is
helpful
not.
thing here. And so those generally get to be the ones that we call demons within Christian theology models. But there are also talks of, well, if you're just a bad person, you can become a demon that way too. It's exciting. It gives you something to aspire to if you don't want to change your ways. All kinds of goodies.
All right. Cool. The last of the Abrahamic religions, of course, is Islam. And I mean last chronologically.
Of course. And the last one we're talking about.
And the last one we're talking about today.
Because we usually stick to chronological.
Last but not least. Very similar, obviously. It's been influenced by Judaism and Christianity. When death is imminent, a family member or close friend is present to say the Shahada, which is the...
there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet.
Yes. There's a word for it, something of faith.
Statement of faith,
declaration of faith. Thank you.
Yeah.
Declaration of faith. We talked about this in our Islam episode years ago, but the Shahada is also recited when you're born. So it's just, if you're born and die a Muslim, it's kind of a nice full circle moment. It's
a very convenient conversion tool. All you got to do is shout that in somebody's ear, and bam.
Do you actually shout it?
I mean, some people, like the video of the guy who doing like a really awful baptism of a baby with dunk, 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 dunk.
The baby gets shaken baby. Yeah.
And the parents are just horrified. There are people who shout at the children, but that's not likely the typical format.
All right. Again, with the other Abrahamic faiths, and more strictly, Muslims do not cremate their dead. Some Jews do. I'd say half of Christians do, and that's Muslims do.
Right.
They do not cremate their dead because they believe in the physical resurrection that will happen. And autopsies are also forbidden. Unnecessary autopsies. Obviously, I presume in the case of murder, they would do an autopsy, but if someone dies in their home, they don't do autopsies.
Right. There are places where autopsies just aren't happening. But here in North America, if something bad happens, it's going to happen. And you can put on your frowny face all you want. It's still going to happen. You just muscle through it.
But organ donation is okay because it helps people.
So I'm really glad that exception exists. It feels weird theologically.
It feels contradictory.
Yeah, but I appreciate that exception exists because it helps people.
Yeah. I mean, if someone's dead and you don't care why they died, what is the point of an autopsy?
Right.
Right, if they're 80-something years old.
Yeah.
And they died at home in their bed or in a hospital in the bed.
There's going to come a time 100 years from now, and our podcast will still be available on podcast libraries.
Yes.
And somebody's going to hear that it was normal for us to die at 80 and go, what the hell was wrong with these people?
You think our life expectancy is going to get that?
I think our life expectancy can reasonably be expected to be extended by decades.
All right.
I got high hopes. We'll see.
Bodies are ritually washed and wrapped in a white sheet before burial, and they are washed 3 times by a family member of the same gender as the deceased. Sharia law dictates that funeral planning start immediately after the death, and bodies are buried quickly. There are no viewings, so no way. So you did not stay up all night drinking with your dead grandma. Have you seen Dairy Girls?
I've seen a little bit of Dairy Girls, but I definitely have not seen whatever has come to your mind.
There's an episode and they're at someone's wake, and my favorite character is Sister Michael. She's a curmudgeonly nun who, I don't even know if she has that much faith. And there's one part she's at this wake and she's talking to a family member. The family member is very annoying. She's like, "Oh my God, is this my wake? Am I dead? Am I in hell?"
Love it.
No, Sister Michael. I'll show it to you after. I love her.
Okay.
I watched it a whole series and it's filled with charming teens. I was like, no, that grumpy old lady, that's my favorite.
That sounds right. So, if you were wondering, yes, Muslims believe in ghosts. The spirits of the dead are supposed to go on to an underworld called Barzakh.
Ooh, that's a good name.
Yeah, I like the name. To be honest, I did not look up what the name means. I'm sure it's got meaning, but I'll look it up later. Improper burial can impede the journey to this underworld.
Oh, that's why they're so regimented in it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you don't want to risk screwing this up, and then you've got a ghost wandering around.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, if you ever notice ghosts, it's not because they're doing nice things for you. Nobody's emptying your dishwasher. It's not happening.
Have you seen that webcomic of this little ghost? And he's like, "I love home decorating." And he's like moving around frames and vases. And the family's like, "Ah!" But he's just this cute little ghost. It's like, I love this work. It makes me way too happy, but also sad.
I love it. Yeah, that's great. So the shades of righteous spirits are expected to linger at their own graves, which feels a little bit weird. I had to dig at this. There's like the soul goes on to the underworld and awaits resurrection, but a shadow of that soul lingers at the grave so that people can come and talk to it and get whatever great mystic knowledge is reserved for not the living, but apparently the shades are willing to share it sometime.
Well, it feels like a pretty common practice of like,
yeah, I mean,
visiting a grave to talk to a loved one.
I would say it's pretty close to universal that you would go to wherever you buried your loved ones to talk to them, hoping to get some sort of answer. And this,
but they believe that they actually stay there, which is cool.
Yeah. It's kind of nifty.
Yeah. All right, heading to the east, air quotes.
Vaguely eastward from where we were.
Or we're heading to the Dharmic religions is actually a better title. Hinduism.
Yeah.
So when death is near, it is common to obtain water for purification from the Ganges River, which is considered sacred.
Remember, we talked about how the Hindu people are the river folk.
The river folk. It is important to be surrounded by loved ones at the time of your death. If the body is left alone, light, ideally a candle, should be left near the body as close to the head as can be done safely so.
Yeah, you don't want them catching on fire.
No. To comfort the lingering spirit. Generally, for Hindus, families are encouraged to remain conservative in their mourning, allowing the soul to move on quickly to its next stage. The soul is said to linger as long as people hold it with their thoughts, so mourners are encouraged to focus on happy thoughts and memories. I like that.
Right? So it's okay to mourn, but not too long and not too negatively, which is good. Remember the good times.
Right. Families typically prefer to bury the body within a day. Any work the coroner might need to do is a major inconvenience.
I mean, that's true generally.
All organs need to be returned to their place before burial, so no organ donation here.
Yeah. There's definitely going to be exceptions to that. Some people are a lot more liberal but the general religious expectation is leave it be.
The soul is believed to carry on to its next incarnation, whether as an angel, a human, or an animal, or better yet, escape the cycle of samsara and recombine with Brahma, the source of all creation, potentially to be recycled into creation, but that would be as a nearly totally new soul.
Yeah, this cycle of samsara is a really interesting thing to study. So much potential. Or just go back and recombine with God. And maybe he'll use you again.
Maybe he'll use you for something else. You've done it, but now you're a rock because he needed a rock right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you'll recall, you come back based on how good you were, your karma in your past lives. So if you're doing good, you'll come back as something better. If you're not doing so good, you're heading back to that rock.
Yeah. And that's historically that was like the way to move between castes.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's just being reborn yet.
Yeah. And now we've seen in some places some movement between castes is more possible than in other places.
I mean, this generation, I think, is caring less about caste than ever before. And I'm sure in the next 20, 30, 40 years, it'll
get a little bit better every generation.
Yeah.
One can hope anyway.
Tell me about the ghosts, though.
Oh, man. So there's some baggage here with Hindu ghosts. You're supposed to move on to the next life.
So if you don't,
you're supposed to get a new body.
Downgrading.
Right. You're supposed to get a new body.
So a ghost is like a variant in Loki. You've come out of the timeline.
A little bit.
Interesting.
I mean, to the point where you've got folks like the TVA saying, no, you need to get back in line.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a fair enough analogy of what we're looking at.
Okay.
It's not perfect.
But you're right, because you're either supposed to come back better or come back worse. So if you're not coming back at all and you're not escaping samsara, there's a problem.
Yes.
Okay. I can't wait to hear this.
So ghosts are a very serious matter. Reincarnation is the normal path. Something is keeping spirits from passing on to the next phase, which could theoretically be nirvana. But if you're in this situation where you're lingering here, maybe that next step isn't nirvana. So there's a good list of things that might prevent a spirit from moving on, and thus lingering as a noticeable and likely malevolent spirit. We've got improper burial. So a lot of religions worry about burying people properly to prevent ghost problems. We've got violent death. Loads of fun there. Unfinished business. I mean, that's bad karma. Most of these are bad karma type things. Sometimes it's not your karma, but other people's karma inflicted on you. But if you've got unfinished business, that's your own karma. And the worst of all of these, the one that had some serious baggage that I thought was really interesting, is if a woman dies in childbirth or at the abuse of her in-laws, then she is said to return as a churl or chudel or whatever 400 different ways there are of pronouncing that based on the various languages of the region. A malevolent and destructive spirit is what a churl is. And they are focused on the destruction of the family that wronged her.
Oh.
Yeah. It's apparently very dramatic, causes a lot of problems. And they've got ghost hunters to deal with that.
Yeah. I was going to say, that sounds like a plot of a good Bollywood movie.
There's got to be one, right? The odds are good.
The odds are, I might have to do some digging. Yeah. Cool.
Right?
Buddhism.
So I remember showing you a video a little while ago that looked super suspicious.
I remember when I saw this, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So Buddhism, sort of overarching, very similar to Hinduism, trying to escape the cycle of life and death. But there's some nuances and some practices within Buddhism that are neat / kind of gross. Yeah,
their care for the dead is completely incompatible with what we see in the Hindu tradition.
I am tempted to put a trigger warning on this part of the episode. I found it a bit gross.
Sure.
Mostly the Sokushin Butsu.
You've been warned. Skip ahead 5 minutes if you don't want to handle this.
Yeah, it's just like body horror is a bit strong, but it is a little gross. So we're going to talk about Tibetan sky burials. Tell me about this video that you showed me.
So there was this person in a little corral full of vultures, because they don't always just fly around waiting for stuff. Sometimes they know where the good stuff is. And sometimes they're part of a farm. And this person was just chopping up a human skeleton up. It was a pretty clean skeleton. Somebody had already taken care of business.
And it was very clear from the ribcage that it was a human skeleton.
It was very obviously human.
So this was a Tibetan sky burial. I don't know if it was in Tibet, but that's where it comes from. The term sky burial is a Western term. The actual practice, the translation translates to giving alms to the birds, which I kind of love.
It's for the birds.
This is a practice where the corpse is placed on a mountain to decompose through exposure to the elements and animal scavenging. Obviously, in the case Preston's talking about, for whatever reason, they need to speed it up, or...
I mean, this could have been taking care of the skeleton after the scavenging. Yeah.
So, Vajrayana Buddhists believe that the body is an empty vessel once the spirit has left, so none of this physical resurrection, and therefore there's no reason to keep it. The person's got a new body somewhere else. Now, they died, they've resurrected, reincarnated somewhere else. So, yeah.
Buddhists just generally aren't terribly worried about the corpse, and that's nice. I can appreciate that. Just don't worry about it.
Another Buddhist practice that mildly traumatized me, and it has I feel like a deeper theological discussion we could talk about.
Sure.
Is soku shinbatsu, is the practice of self-mummification.
That's so gross.
It started by Japanese Buddhist monks. It's an ascetic practice. Ascetic? I always say it's an
ascetic is a kind of acid.
It's an ascetic practice that takes about 3,000 days. That's about 8 years, roughly.
Sure.
To complete. And it involves essentially eating a tree. Monks would eat pine needles, resin, and seeds found in these trees, and the process eventually eliminates all body fat.
So you've had Buckley's. Tastes awful, but it works.
Yeah, that's part of the tree.
Yeah, so the reason that it tastes awful and works is because pine needle oil is mildly toxic. That's why grass doesn't grow right up to the base of the tree. Why would you want to eat pine needles? Unless, of course, this is your plan.
Well, and yes, and this is, I'll finish explaining it, but this idea, and I guess it's like self-flagellation of like, what is so important that you're willing to do this? And as an atheist, I'm like, nothing. Anyway, we'll come back to that. I'll continue explaining this horrific process. So eating the tree eliminates all body fat. It does result in starvation. It leaves the body well preserved, and they found corpses with skin, hair, teeth, nails in the forest, which is wild. And obviously, probably because you're right, of the mild toxins, animals don't touch them.
Right.
And the skin doesn't rot away. So I don't know who figured this out. I don't know why anyone wanted to figure this out, but...
Right. There's so much that we do that, like, knowing it, sure, we can keep going. How did we first find out?
Right.
Like cheese.
There's
the
so
milk
many.
went so bad, and then all of a sudden was fine again.
There's a lot of things in life. I'm like, how did we figure this out? This is what I don't think we needed to figure out, but...
Yeah.
So the practice has been banned since the late 1800s in Japan, but, and there's pictures of this if you do like this kind of stuff. The Buddhist monk Luang Pho Dang died in 1973. He was a Thai monk from Thailand after practicing Soku Shinbutsu, and his body's actually on display, and they just die while meditating. So he's sitting there cross-legged, and they put sunglasses on him because apparently his eye sockets are pretty horrific. But I mean, it's an interesting example of they didn't do anything to him. He's behind glass now, but
I would hope so, because people are going to be touching, right?
Anyway, yeah, but they didn't do any other sort of embalming to him besides
what he did himself.
So anyway, it's an interesting, but I guess we even have cases like 9/11. What do you believe in so much that you're willing to die for it? Something that takes 3,000 days of some commitment.
Right? I mean, there's a lot of things I like to eat that would slow this process down.
I don't think you're supposed to eat other things first.
I know. It's a major commitment.
You'd be like, you'd eat like a couple pine needles and then be like, oh, but a burger sounds great.
Right?
Yeah, and the Luang Pho Dang, he had 6 kids and a wife, and he left to become a Buddhist monk, and then he decided
let's end it all the slowest way possible.
The slowest way possible, and I don't know. I can't wrap my head around it. But I guess
It's not for me.
but John Paul II flogged himself, and people flew into the Twin Towers, and Luang Pho Dang starved himself to death. I guess maybe I'm just too apathetic, Preston.
Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe I just like life too much.
There's a lot to like about life.
I think so, but
All right. Well, believe it or not, Buddhists believe in ghosts too.
what? I'm seeing a theme. This might be the only universal belief in the entire world. I don't believe in ghosts, though, so...
Well, we've already pointed at a couple of groups that deny the universality
That's
of the
true.
belief. Jehovah's Witnesses and Christadelphians.
But I do know atheists that believe in ghosts, which is funny to me.
Right? You can believe in ghosts without believing in God.
No, but I just...
Now,
Anyway.
I think if you do believe in ghosts, it's easy to talk somebody into believing that there's more, and then bam, you get into the mysterious agnostic belief in some sort of God.
Or some sort of something.
Right. Well, even if the universe is God, you still got
Right.
a God.
Yeah.
Right?
Anyway.
But
I'm
yes,
so excited to find a universal belief.
We're close.
It's not even universal that puppies are adorable.
right? Puppies are haram.
Anyway.
All right. So many Buddhists celebrate a ghost festival where they offer food to ghosts who might linger. This is an expression of compassion mostly, which is one of the greatest virtues of Buddhism. And in return, the ghosts do not bother the community, which seems to usually work. Or, depending on your measure of things, maybe always works.
Ooh, because they don't exist.
Right. Ghosts might also move on to a realm specifically for hungry ghosts, where there are no offerings, and everybody is just hangry all the time.
Ooh, that sounds scary.
That sounds like hell.
Yeah.
I feel like this is a really nice way of saying they're in hell.
Yeah. I don't want to be hungry.
Yeah, that sucks. In the Tibetan tradition, a bothersome ghost can be captured with a special trap and extra killed with a ritual dagger, sending it to be reborn again.
Do you know what that reminds me of? When people say he was killed to death, I'm like,
Yeah, uh-huh.
Yeah. Redundant.
Murder, death, killed.
He was murdered to death.
But if a ghost is sticking around,
yeah.
There is a procedure in place to kill the ghost so that it is not an operating ghost any further.
I was going to say that's the only context in which I will accept killed to death is when you're killing a ghost.
Yeah, it doesn't fit in the frame that we have for ghosts here. It's different than exorcism, which is kind of what we would talk about getting rid of a ghost. But there's some commonalities. There is one particular ghost that I think is rather interesting, and the Dalai Lama agrees. Maybe not for the same reason. Dorji Shugden is a powerful 17th century monk. I say is because that's what some people believe in Tibet. He's revered by some who claim that his lingering ghost is a god. Most Buddhists don't really mess with arguments about theology. Don't worry about gods. Worry about your own path through samsara.
This one. It's a hot topic.
Yeah, because a lot of people believe that Shugden is a god that is like worthy of worship and like focus on him a fair bit. And other people not so much, of course. The Dalai Lama is not a fan at all. He says that Shugden is an evil spirit. And yeah, this division is causing a lot of contention in Tibet.
Sikhs, Sikhism, like Buddhists and Hindus, believe in reincarnation, which is interesting because it's also a monotheistic religion. Remember, it's the baby of Hinduism and Islam.
Hindu's a little bit monotheistic.
That's true.
Depending on your interpretation of all of the things and expressions of God.
So Sikhs believe in reincarnation. That comes from the Hinduism side. And to eventually escape the cycle and become one with God. But only one God. I guess, as you pointed out, Brahma.
Right. 1, 3, 700 million, whatever.
It's fine. Cremation is the preferred preferred and traditionally accepted method to deal with the deceased in Sikhism. This is the first time we've seen that.
It's like a system built around being wise in a very densely populated part of the world thought of a solution to one of a few problems.
Family members are expected to witness the cremation process, which I thought was interesting. I don't think that's very typical here.
I don't know if we make it very convenient to witness a cremation here.
I think you can if you ask, but I don't think it's typical.
Right.
Because even when we put down Paige, if you've heard our little jingles on the podcast, there's no more jingles anymore. It was an option to watch her be cremated. I was like, no, I'm good. But I haven't had a human in my life cremated recently, so I don't know.
Fingers crossed that it doesn't happen for a while.
I'm going to do that.
And if you're curious why people cross their fingers or knock on wood, we did an episode on that a little while ago.
Ashes are scattered into a river. They believe that the body should be returned to the earth and that the family left behind doesn't carry this attachment to the body. In instances where Sikhs may choose burial, headstones are not allowed because the body is just that shell that we've seen in the other Dharmic religions. There should be no attachment to the body. A Sikh funeral is Antam Sanskar, which translates to final ceremony. The deceased Sikh is dressed in their 5 Sikh articles of faith before the funeral and cremation. So that's the Kesh, Kanga, Kacha, Kara, and Kirpan. If you want to know what those are,
check out our
past episode. One of those is a little knife.
Yeah.
That's the Kirpan. After a funeral service, family and friends gather to read the Sri Guru Granth Sahib, which is the final guru in the holy book.
So as an heir to both Hindu and Muslim philosophies, the ideas of ghosts live in both realms to some extent. We do have the worry of the ghosts of the abused, that maybe they'll come back and cause some problems. And it's kind of hard to work that out of the faith when it's still living in at least the more secular portion of the Hindu reality. Yeah, nothing terribly new and exciting there.
Now we have some outliers, some that attach directly to religion, some are just cultural practices around death. Now that we all know what Zoroastrianism is, they are actually do something very similar to the sky funerals. They have a tower of silence.
That sounds really cool.
It does. They put their dead on this tower, raised platform for scavengers in the elements to aid in decomposition. It is a circular, raised structure used just for this purpose. This keeps corpses, which are considered to be unclean, away from the sacred elements of fire, earth, and water.
Put it up in the air.
Well, there's not much you can do about that if you're going to do it this way.
Right.
It either has to be earth. Well, I guess any of them. One of them has to be tainted, though, to get rid of the body. Yeah. So they've opted for air and giving it to the animals. I didn't read the full article because it was behind a paywall, which I hate. But there's no towers of silence in the West. So that has led Zoroastrians to have to compromise on their last funeral rites and traditions, which is kind of sad. I mean,
right.
And this is where,
fire is such a big thing. There's always these fire temples for Zoroastrianism. And part of me wants to say, well, just build a separate fire for cremation. But that is still putting an unclean thing in sacred fire.
Holy. And this is where, I said at the top of the episode, some things make a lot of sense. Like getting rid of a body in a very both economical and ecological way makes a ton of sense. And I don't think it gets more sanitary than a tower of silence.
Right.
Whatever you could argue, a sky burial on a mountain could get into the water system or whatever. But yeah, you're right. The West is so uptight about
dead bodies.
So do I think, eating a tree to die makes a lot of sense? No. Do I think a sky burial does? Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, fair.
And so it made me sad for them. Like, imagine not being able to have a funeral the way you want to have a funeral for a loved one.
There's got to be a way that we can work around existing systems to make that work out. I don't know.
I feel like no, because there'd still be laws, but the solution is buying private land.
Right.
But you still have to circumvent laws with dead bodies, and I don't know what laws.
Cops aren't allowed on our property.
Yeah.
What's that tower for? None of your business. It's a religious structure.
You can't see what's on top of it. Of course, we have, drones and airplanes and all sorts of things. People would know there's dead.
New project. I'm going to design a structure that isn't super friendly to drones, where you could have a tower of silence.
Okay.
This would be a thing that will happen a lot more easily if I knew people who were Zoroastrian.
Well, if you know a Zoroastrian, put them in touch with us.
Yeah.
I would just love to interview them. And Preston can talk about his scheme with them.
Yep. All right. New Orleans jazz funeral is a fun little extra thing to talk about.
Yeah.
So Louisiana, I've never been. Have you been to Louisiana?
No, it's actually quite high on my list of places in the States to go. I would really like to go to New Orleans.
Yeah. It's, from what I've seen on TV and movies, a great collection of people. That's about what I got for my own knowledge. But luckily we do reading.
Yeah, and I mean, this is nice because we have talked about voodoo and a little bit of hoodoo in the past.
Yeah. So there's strong colonial past there, connects to Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean. There is a great tradition of military-style brass bands at these funeral processions. You can find videos on YouTube. They're great. Mix that with African spiritual practices, Catholic influences, and, this being the birthplace of jazz, New Orleans has a pretty unique funerary tradition. Lots of dancing. I've seen more than one casket drop.
I mean, that person doesn't care anymore.
Right? And everybody's having a good time. You like, for sure there are going to be a couple living people who are a little uncomfortable with dropping a casket. But that's not a thing that has to be remembered.
Right.
Yeah, they really incorporate celebration into the mourning. Yeah, you lost somebody you love, but you get to celebrate the time you did enjoy with them and celebrate the fact that you've been brought together with your community and family.
You know what? I'm just going to touch on this right now because I'm thinking of it.
Do it.
Our good friend Sarah Snyder, our very first ever guest on the podcast, she shared I guess it's a meme. It's not a funny one the other day. And she said, things that are said at funerals should be said at birthdays.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm going to start doing that. I'm going to write long, loving cards to my friends now. So
I like it.
It doesn't all get left to the last minute.
Yeah.
Ghanaian Fantasy Coffins. So interesting. We'll post some pictures on the day this launches on our Discord. These are works of art used by the Ga people of southern Ghana. They believe that our lives continue into the next world the same as they did on Earth. So the coffins represent the deceased by using different symbols. Fantasy coffins are shaped and painted. You can get them in ships, mermaids, chickens, shoes, and so much more. And yeah, often they use it to represent what your job was in life. So pilots will be buried in planes. And
so I wrap my head around a lot of careers that would get you buried in something that's shaped like a ship. What do I have to do to get buried inside a mermaid?
I would also say ship-related work, ocean navigating. You can also be a professional mermaid now.
Okay, fair.
I don't know how popular that is in Ghana. I feel like it's a real white person thing.
Famadihana is the traditional Madagascar ceremony of the Malagasy people of turning of the bones. It's basically just a way to continually remember the deceased. Bodies of ancestors are removed from their resting place, rewrapped, and their names written on the shroud to be remembered. That's kind of nice. A little gross.
Yeah, I was going to say, I want to be the person. There's there's a point where it is horrible, and then it'll be, once they're just bones, it's fine. But there's the first couple of years where they're still
icky.
I wouldn't want to be that person. But
yeah, when it's sticky, it's a bad time.
Yeah. But once they're just clean bones, that's not so bad.
And depending on the situation, I mean, it might not even be a long time, right?
I don't know how long the body takes to decompose.
It varies on region, right?
Well,
Madagascar is wet.
Yeah, and then I mean over here they don't decompose because we put so many fucking toxic shit into them.
There is that.
Please don't do that to me. I want to be a mushroom.
Okay.
Hollow me out and then turn me into mushroom.
Yeah? Okay. So there is more to this process. They don't just wrap them up and then stick them back where they found them. They dance with their skeletons. They have a real party. Almost, I'm going to say, Mexican Day of the Dead level.
Yeah.
But this practice creeps a lot of people out. And so they're doing it less and less. I don't know if it needs to be stamped out. It doesn't feel like that is necessary. But the Christian missionaries have really put a lot of pressure on them to stop. Even though the Catholic Church is okay with it.
The Catholic Church has come out to say they're okay with it. So I'm guessing these are Protestant missionaries. They're like, maybe we shouldn't dance with bones.
Yeah. I don't know.
Catholic Church has come out and said, no, it's fine. Have fun.
I mean, especially this newest Pope, he's mostly like, yeah, keep doing your good things. Please don't leave the church.
I just heard, and by the time this episode comes out, this will be really old news, but that he's like not approved of gay marriage, but there's steps being taken to. You can't call it a marriage, but you can get blessed. Yeah,
the Pope did a little while ago announce that he will bless gay unions, which is, it's a step. It is a step.
Yep. So, anyway. Preston mentioned the Day of the Dead, and we've talked about it a little bit before, and it is, of course, the subject of video or popular animated films. The Day of the Dead is November 2nd, religiously. Secularly, it has extended to more than a single day, and the festival is much more fun. The ghosts aren't likely offended.
Right. It's just loads of rum. Loads and loads and loads of rum.
For that part of the
and
world.
Bright colors and parades. All right. So I did a bunch of deep diving into near-death experiences.
Okay.
So research into this field of near-death experiences is relatively new. We haven't been talking about it for even 200 years quite yet, really. And so it started when people started regularly falling from heights great enough to have time to contemplate their lives. So fairly recent history.
Okay, yeah.
And so when we started reviving people from clinical deaths, then we started getting a lot more people giving reports on their near-death experiences, experiencing the sorts of things in huge numbers even, enough that we could study them more effectively. So in 1975, a fellow named Raymond Moody, I think he was credited by most people as coming up with this term near-death experience. He studied about 150 patients who all claimed to have had a near-death experience. His findings outlined 9 common steps in this experience. Though not everybody experienced all 9 steps, but they were nearly universally in this order.
So almost everyone experienced one and then they get less common? Is that my understanding?
No, sometimes you could have number 2, number 5, and then number 8. And that's
okay, I wasn't sure if one was the most
Whatever.
common and then...
No, these are all this is the order of all the steps. Which ones you get to experience may vary.
Okay. But this is... Okay, I see. Okay.
So the first is immediate peace and pain relief. Really sucks when this one's not on your list. And then there's this unfamiliar but calming sound or even music. And then there's the moment where your self is elevated above your own body. And sometimes watching medical professionals trying to bring you back or whatever.
Brian's aunt experienced that.
Yeah?
Yeah. She's talked about that one. I don't know if she experienced others, but she has talked about number 3.
Cool. And then the person leaves Earth and ascends quickly through a dark sky into a bright tunnel. And then the person arrives in a brightly lit heavenly space. Maybe it's a nice garden, maybe it's at a fountain, whatever. It's a nice place where you feel comfortable and you are in awe of your surroundings. And then the person is met by deceased friends and family. And then the person meets a god that usually matches their religious tradition. Or a brilliant mass of just tangible love. and bright lights. And then the person undergoes an instantaneous life review and understands how all the good and all the bad they have done has affected them and the people around them. Usually this happens in the presence of that God. And then finally, after all of that, the person returns to the awareness of their body, and they are told that it's not their time to die, or they choose to return to be with their loved ones who are not dead yet. Remember, not everybody has all of them, but this is the steps in that order, almost always in this order.
Okay.
And it's kind of nifty. There's been a lot of out-of-body experiences that people have reported on, and there's been loads of trials to try and figure out these out-of-body experiences. They've even done weird tests like, oh, we're going to hide a thing in the room that you're not going to know is there when you're sleepy, whatever. But when you are outside of your body, maybe you'll spot it. And never has anybody ever successfully identified the hidden target. But there's also loads of reasons why they wouldn't. Like maybe they didn't look that direction. Maybe they didn't get high enough out of their body to really see it, whatever.
See, I think it'd be more like a dream state where you dream. Even this afternoon, I took a nap and I dreamed I was awake getting ready for the podcast. And then I actually woke up and I was like, shit, I'm not ready for the podcast.
Sure.
But in my dream, I was sitting up on our couch.
Right.
Getting ready to record.
Yeah. We'll get into the more theories about
Okay.
that. That's how I want to finish this out,
All
I
right.
think. It's normal to see personalities change in some way after this experience. I don't know why some people like Jehovah's Witnesses and other people like them blame this on the soul transfer that comes with blood transfusion. This is why you're a different person after a near-death experience. Because you got somebody else's blood in you.
Okay, but like reading your list, which you'll get into, most of these look pretty positive. So why would you be against blood transfusion? These all sound pretty good for the most part.
These 9 steps are a pretty pleasant experience. Not universal. There are people who have
No, but the
bad
changes
time.
that we haven't gone over at first glance all look quite positive. Sure. So why would you be against blood transfusion when it looks like it's a positive change?
See, I think that it's just normal to be a little bit changed after a traumatic experience.
Trauma, yeah, absolutely.
Trauma changes you.
Yeah.
That's the deal.
That's literally science.
But the changes that are typically happening with this experience, we've got greater compassion. That's a win.
Yeah.
Oh no, the blood transfusion ruined it.
The blood transfusion made me nicer. No!
We've got higher self-esteem.
No!
Greater sense of their purpose in the world. Less concern for acquiring material wealth.
Capitalism.
We've got a desire to learn more about the world around them. Elevated spirituality, though not necessarily a greater commitment to any religion, just generally more aware of feelings,
the spirit level, yeah,
and just the greater self and the thing that binds us all together. There's also, they usually stop worrying about death as much, but they're more willing to and more interested in really living their life as much as they can. And most notably, these folks often claim to have witnessed an afterlife. And we're talking about millions upon millions of people reporting these experiences. The most recent number I got for the United States is unfortunately 10 years ago or more. But they said 9 million people in the United States in 2011 had reported a near-death experience.
Wow.
And that's just the United States.
And that's such a huge number, but then you forget how big the States is. So like in the grand scheme of things, it's not a huge number, but that's a lot of people.
Well, and we're talking about a country that builds itself in a way that makes it super likely to have a near-death experience. But I think it's really interesting that this is nearly universal. These things have been recorded in nearly every culture group around this planet. Mm. I think the stats are 95% of culture groups, 95% have reported at least one instance of somebody reporting a near-death experience.
Okay.
Yeah. And I found a really cool article, came out just a few years ago in 2019, on an LDS study on the subject. So I'll post that in our Discord. It's kind of nifty. An awful lot of people who go through near-death experience, that there's a panic. And so it makes sense that when they suffer a clinical death, maybe they don't have this experience. Maybe they do. A lot of them, instead of reporting this near-death experience like we've described it, report nothing at all. And then they come back, so there's nothing on the other side, nothing even matters. I feel like that's exactly as valid as all of the others. I don't think there's any reason to believe that these experiences, positive, negative, or nothing at all, really define anything beyond the self. It just makes sense to me.
And I know this is impossible to test, but it'd be
Sure.
interesting to see if you could change it without, what a near-death experience would be like without cultural and religious influence. Because you can't.
You always
'cause
have
even
culture.
an atheist has seen the movies and read the stories.
Right.
So, is there an afterlife, or is it just that I think this is how it's supposed to go, and when your body goes into panic mode?
Right. Yeah, it's a tricky thing.
So anyway, again, you can't test it because even if you go to another country, they have their own gods and their own belief in the afterlife. So they would have that experience programmed in their brain, whether they are religious or not, right? If you're someone living in India and you're an atheist, you could still have a religious death experience just from the cultural influence.
Yeah.
Is my point. I hope that was clear.
Yeah, there's a lot of different models that explain the phenomenon, and I'm a big fan of the expectancy model, that you see what you hope or expect to see if you see anything, based on everything that you've just listed.
Yeah.
There's alternative models too, and I can't just list the one that I prefer.
All right, well, lay them on me, Preston.
There's the depersonalization model that posits that the trauma of an event causes something like a schizophrenic break, depersonalizing the experience of impending death. The problem with this is that not everybody has an out-of-body experience when they have this near-death experience. And the survivors almost never display anything that looks like they've
Afterwards.
had a personality break.
Yeah, but I think that's still a good explanation of an out-of-body experience.
Sure.
Because you know what the room was like when you were in it, and you know what your body looks like lying there.
Right.
So I think your brain projects that
The
as opposed to an
imagination's
actual
powerful.
spirit watching.
Right. There's the dissociation model, which I think is a better alternative to the depersonalization model.
Okay, yeah.
But it really only addresses the out-of-body experience. Then there's the birth model that tries to explain why you have this tunnel part of the experience, that it's a revived memory of your birth experience. So the weird thing about that is that we're actually really close to about half and half on some of these people were born vaginally, others were born through the cesarean. And that's one trouble, that half of these people weren't born in the typical way that you might expect anyway. I mean, cesarean section is getting a lot more common, so
But not
I don't think it's even fair to
necessarily
call it
tunneling
atypical.
out. Or,
Right.
I mean, my brother came out feet first.
Sure.
So that's reverse tunnel.
Briefly wore your mom as a hat.
Yeah.
Also, it's noted by an awful lot of scholars that have issue with this birth model that infants are not equipped to process or remember being moved through the birth process. So the memory of the tunnel experience is not supposed to be even possible.
Yeah, I mean,
But the mind is the puzzle.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few instances where people claim to have birth memories, but even then, that's so hard to
Right.
prove. Again, same thing. How many times have you seen a birth, whether it's in sex ed or on TV?
Right.
So you can say, yeah, I have a memory of birth, but
Well, and it's so easy to construct memories.
Mhm.
If you just build an emotional connection to a thing that you've seen, you can build it into your memories so that later on when you reflect, it's, oh yeah, no, I've got this memory stored. Yeah, it's wild.
I mean, it's not really addressing this, but I mean, people have talked about this before of like, what do you think happens when we die? Well, what do you think happens before we're born?
Right.
And probably that, you know, the first time you have any sort of cognitive function is not in utero.
Right.
So.
Yeah. It's interesting stuff, though. There are also models that get into the brain chemistry stuff. I don't think we're really prepared to discuss that, but we did talk about drugs a little while ago, several episodes ago. High and Mighty, I think was the name of the episode.
Oh, yeah, that's pushing a year ago now, easily.
DMT might get you something pretty close to a near-death experience.
Okay.
And honestly, it's likely that there's a combination of psychological and physiological elements that play into the near-death experience. But it's fascinating stuff.
This whole episode was fascinating. Not that I don't enjoy all of our episodes, but this was a particular.
And so I really want to hear from our audience in our Discord some things that maybe we shouldn't have left out and build some conversations around that.
Yeah, or even funerals, right?
Right?
I shouldn't say I've only ever been to Catholic funerals, but I've been relatively to a lot of Catholic funerals. So, which is weird because I'm not Catholic.
Right.
But yeah, just different traditions and practices. And I'd love to hear people's opinions on things like the sky burial, which again, I think is very economical and ecological.
Right.
Why don't we do that here? Why can't I just leave a body on my backyard? Why aren't there bear ghosts? Let's get to the real root of the problem. Bear ghosts.
You can also join the conversation on Facebook and Instagram. Our best conversations are on Discord, though. We're also on YouTube and Patreon, where we can hopefully talk you into giving us some of your money in exchange for goods and services.
For bonus content. And of course, if the subscription model is not your thing, we have our spread shop where you can buy some sweet merch.
I think that's about it for today. Thanks for joining us.
I was going to say, stay alive, everyone.
Yes. Join us next time.
Peace be with you. Don't die. We need the listeners.